Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Bonita. This is the bit where I do my sort of 5 to 10 minute talk on trauma. So every morning we have Coffee with Bonita. We will do a specific topic area. The trauma topic today is going to be divided up into so what is trauma and what it looks like, and I'm going to introduce the concept of PTSD with you. And then I'm going to move into July, where I'm going to talk about the effects of trauma and PTSD on the brain. And that will give you an opportunity to learn a bit more about it and then to decide how you feel you can deal with this and what help you actually need. So that's fine. Sorry, I can't put my camera on. Oh, that's great. Don't worry, Claire. Thanks for joining us today. So for those that don't know me, I'm Bonita Ackerman-Dupree. I am the founder of the Anxiety Recovery School. I am a trauma recovery therapist. I specialize in anxiety, stress, and PTSD. And I work with individuals and children. I work one-to-one, and I also work online. So if you don't know yet, every sort of 2 to 3 months, we run a anxiety and stress or breaking the anxiety cycle challenge. And that's an opportunity for you to jump on, come and work with me for 3 nights, learn as much as you can. And then we have an online course available at a really, really good rate for you to crack on and to help you manage your anxiety better. So that's more about me. We've got 1,600 women in our group today. Now, I don't just work with women. I work with women in the Anxiety Recovery School, but I actually specialize in working with children and men. So that's a little bit more about me. So let's move on to trauma. So trauma is something that they reckon at least 70% of the population will actually go through. How you experience trauma as an individual is completely different. How I went through my trauma and how you go through your trauma are completely different because we are so individual. How my coping strategies, my resiliency as an individual, and how yours is and compares will determine whether we have severe trauma, whether we move through it naturally, or whether we move into a state and we develop PTSD. Now, anxiety and stress and trauma is a symptom of what's happened to us. So all of the bits and pieces that you're experiencing now, and I'll go through quite a lot of that later, is a symptom of something that's happened to us directly. So it could be an event. It could have happened to you, or you could have seen it, or it could have happened to a loved one. So there are different types of trauma. And depending on the severity of the event, depending on the longevity, so how long it lasted. So for example, an accident, from the moment the accident occurred, were you awake during it? Do you remember parts of it? Blurred memory, and then waking up, and then the aftermath. So recovery period, if you were injured, all determines the severity and the effect on any individual that goes through trauma. Now, how do we define the spectrum of trauma? Well, we see it as a single event, and that is generally an unexpected occurrence. So if you think about something in your past that was very unexpected, and it can happen to adults and children, very often our trauma is embedded from a very young age, and something happened to us. We may not have all the memory centers, or we perhaps remember part of it. The problem with children is that they will make up the gaps that they don't know. So they might have jaded memories, and then they fill in the gaps, because as humans, we need to know this was the start and this was the end. So often trauma in children is a lot worse, and then it builds over time, and often it's not accurate. And then in adults, it might be that we have it might be words said to us. Very often it can be very traumatic when someone you care about says something to you, or you've had an event happen, and it is so hugely diverse, that event. The second spectrum of trauma is complex trauma, where it's repeated, and very often it is anticipated. So, for example, abuse of all kinds, whether that be emotionally or physically, that is anticipated, and the individual may even know or suspect when it may happen again. That causes major issues with our brain. Okay, it happens in the brain. It is very difficult to work with. Complex trauma isn't session 12, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 sessions with a therapist. It is work that you need to have over a period of time, and it's ongoing because it's multifaceted. There may have been several factors that affected, several people involved, locations, knock-on events like the knock-on of school, the knock-on to friendships, the knock-on to relationships, the knock-on with your family that need to be explored when you suffer from complex trauma. So it's really more difficult. It's also more difficult to diagnose, but generally a good therapist should be able to diagnose complex trauma due to the nature of what's happened to you. Of course, when you build really good rapport with a therapist, you trust them, they will be able to see very quickly what this does or what it is. Now, if you've developed PTSD from your trauma, and not everybody will develop a PTSD. Statistics, there's lots of evidence that suggests that there's between 5 and 15 to 20% of people may develop a single incident trauma from one event or complex trauma. And that's many different factors will affect that. But when you've suffered a trauma and you then have a stress-related disorder, there are 4 key areas that we will identify as therapists and that will help us diagnose. So first of all, it's the exposure. So what were you exposed to? Was it actual threat, a threatened life, or were you, there was a threat of death? Trying to get my words out. Did you have a serious injury? So I work with a lot of horse riders. As you can see, that's my gorgeous horse Henry that my wife Claire rides. So often I work with people who have had a serious injury, like they've fallen off their horse. It's quite traumatic. They've broken bones, etc. The aftermath, or was there sexual violence? Now, once we establish that, we then look at what avoidance techniques have you implemented as coping strategies? We all will avoid certain things, places, times, dates, locations, smells, people, etc. So we identify the avoidance. We then identify the negative connotations and also your moods. So they could be massive mood swings, highs, lows, etc. What will count as an arousal? So that could be going into a specific location. I know that after my trauma that I had, I've had several traumas throughout my life. Some were physical due to my life in South Africa, and then others were emotional. But I knew that for a very long time, I had trouble driving into a certain location. For me, it was really difficult. I still have feelings of location due to stuff that's happened to me in my past, and I still work on that. And then how do you re-experience this trauma? How does it come up for you as an individual? When do you re-experience? When are you triggered? What are the specifics? So trauma recovery therapy is very specific, and it's very different to counseling. And this is the difference that you need to make. So if you suffer from anxiety and stress, you have to work backwards to see where it comes from in your triggers. Then we have to identify if there was a trauma. Now, we use various checklists to do this. And if you work with me one-to-one, in my Crack Your Anxiety and Crank Up Your Confidence course, which I offer, I will take you through how to develop your trauma timeline, which is crucially important, and what comes from that, how to work it moving forward, and then to layer the different types of therapy that you need to help yourself through it. So if you felt that perhaps you weren't ready to work with someone, or perhaps there was an affordability issue, go and look at my Crack Your Confidence and Crack Your Anxiety course, because it takes you through 20 modules of how to work through your anxiety and your stress, working through your triggers and traumas. It's a great starting point. And then perhaps later you can work with a therapist. Now, we have 2 different responses when we suffer from trauma. We can have hyper arousal or hypo. Hyper is high, hyper low. So a few things to think about is like when you are hyper, you can be impulsive. You can have perpetual or muscle hypervigilance, so muscle pain, muscle reactions. Some people are more risk takers. They increase risk. You can have a lot of intrusive images or sensations. Racing thoughts is definitely an autonomic response. And then obsessive thoughts and behavior, which will often become very bad. And hypo, which is the lower effect, where you feel really flat, numb, very often happening when there's been a physical effect on you. You can feel like you're not there, or you feel like you're just empty inside. There's nothing there. You disassociate. Now, disassociation can actually occur in hyper and hypo. You have slowed thinking responses, so you just can't make decisions, or everything's just too much for you. You may suffer from collapsed posture, so you go into the fetal position very often. That's really bad for our vagus nerve and our autonomic nervous system, because we close the chest area up, which means we don't breathe enough. That spurs off our cortisol level, which then goes, oh my gosh, is something wrong? So what happens is the body dysregulates, and then it just deactivates our autonomic nervous system, which is our rest and digest and our fear response. And also it deactivates our attachment system. So like, we avoid people, we avoid family, we push ourselves away, we want to be alone. Now, to deal with autonomic responses, and in listening to my clients, I developed the body and brain. I have a body healing course that I've developed on the website. And to help your body along, it's a really good course. There are 14 different exercises to help the autonomic nervous system recover when you've gone through trauma. So again, there is something that you can do now today. You have a learning platform, you purchase the course, all the videos are there. It's all step by step. You can have it on your mobile. And also it takes you through a system where every month, every week, every day, you record what works for you, how you feel. It's very, very effective. So if you felt that your autonomic responses are either high or low, and you can identify that, you need to start to bridge the gap. So basically, with my client base, if you're suffering from trauma and specifically a PTSD, you're either really high or really low. What we need to do is as we move forward in therapy, or if you self-therapy, that you bridge the gap and you start to normalize again. And that is an extremely important way to do this. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into what trauma is and how it presents. This is the starting point. And what I'm going to do in July is, in Coffee with Bonita, we're going to look at the actual effect on the brain and why perhaps you do what you do, or you react the way you do. You might see behavior changes. You might be reacting at work. You might be reacting to your family, and what you can do about it. But in the meantime, have a look at Crack Your Anxiety and Crank Up Your Confidence. I will put the links in the group for you to look at. If you are watching this on replay, I will ask my VA to make sure that the links to the courses are there, so you can start to self-regulate and start to self-heal. So that's my little 10-minute presentation for Coffee with Bonita today. I'm just going to stop the recording now. If you're watching on replay, thank you for watching, but do try and join us next time. Coffee with Bonita will be at a different time in July. It'll probably be an evening slot to accommodate those people who can't make it live. So I'm going to stop the recording and say goodbye to everybody on replay. But if you're here to ask me questions, I'm stopping the recording and we'll revert to that right now.